Split just banned shops from selling alcohol after 8 p.m. In September 2026, it's law. The city that built its entire tourism identity on Diocletian's palace by day and cheap drinks by night has declared the party officially over. And that decision, combined with 5 years of post-Euro inflation, means the split you booked based on a 2019 blog post no longer exists. The question is whether what's replacing it is worth the new price tag.
Welcome to Phil and H Travel. Is it worth it? Today we're in Split, Croatia, where the old city lives inside a Roman emperor's retirement palace. A 6.50 euro ferry puts you on Hvar in under an hour, and a 2026 alcohol ban has just changed the rules for every type of traveler heading there this summer. We're going to cut through the island-hopping romance, price the real costs, and give you the honest verdict on whether Split still belongs in your itinerary.
Welcome to this deep dive. I'm so excited to get into this today. We are taking our brand new, exhaustively researched travel dossier, and we are going to break down all 11 of its analytical modules right here in order.
Yeah, this report was a massive undertaking. We really wanted to strip away, the glossy tourism board spin.
Oh, totally.
And just ignore all those perfectly filtered social media reels. We want to give you the cold, hard, logistical reality of traveling to Split right now.
Exactly, because if you are planning a trip, whether you're a backpacker trying to stretch a vanishing budget, or a family looking for a manageable summer getaway, or even a digital nomad seeking a new base, you have to understand that the rules of European travel have fundamentally shifted.
They really have. Post-pandemic and especially post-Euro, things are just different.
And Split is basically ground zero for this shift. So let's jump right into Module 1. Let's start with the macroeconomic reality. Why are we talking about Split specifically right now?
Well, the biggest reason is that the whole budget Dalmatian narrative, the one that absolutely flooded the internet in the late 2010s, is officially dead.
It's completely gone.
Yeah. You really have to understand the economic tectonic plates that have shifted under Croatia recently. The catalyst for this massive change is largely tied to Croatia adopting the euro in January 2023.
Right.
Since that exact moment, the country has been hit with this staggering 4 to 5% annual tourism inflation rate.
Which is huge.
It is, and it's compounding every single year right through to 2026.
I want to pause on that because the data we pulled for this module is genuinely shocking. I mean, I remember looking at Split trips just a few years ago. Let's look at the actual numbers here.
Let's do it.
Back in 2021, you could grab a standard hostel dorm bed in the city center for like 12 euros.
Yeah, 12 euros. That was standard.
Fast forward to the peak season of 2026, and that exact same bed, no renovations, no added luxury, nothing, is running you 22 to 25 euros.
It's basically doubled.
Right. Or let's talk about food. A waterfront dinner that might have cost you 15 euros a person in 2019.
Yeah.
That is now going to set you back 28 to 38 euros.
That is a massive structural jump. And it's really important to understand the mechanics behind how the euro caused this. It wasn't just, standard global inflation.
No, it was a psychological shift.
Exactly. When a country transitions to a stronger currency, there is this initial disconnect. So local business owner used to charge, say, 110 kuna for a meal. When they convert that to euros, it might mathematically equal something like 14.60.
Right, some weird uneven number.
Exactly. But they don't print a menu with 14.60. They just round up to 16 euros to make it clean.
Naturally.
And in the next season, seeing what tourists are willing to pay, they just bump it to 18 euros. The transition essentially provided a smokescreen for aggressive price recalibration across the entire hospitality sector.
That makes so much sense. It's like the currency switch just wiped the collective memory of what things should actually cost.
Yeah, totally wiped it.
And then right on top of this compounding inflation, we have the headline grabber, the September 2026 alcohol ban.
This is huge.
Shops cannot sell alcohol between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m., period.
Which is a profound civic maneuver. In the dossier, we point out that this isn't just a minor regulatory tweak. It's not just a health initiative.
No, not at all.
It's an intentional, highly visible signal from the city council. They're using legislation to actively shift the city's identity.
Because for a decade, Split tolerated, and let's be honest, profited from being a massive party destination.
Exactly. And now they are pushing hard toward high-yield cultural tourism.
They're essentially trying to gentrify their own tourist demographic.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. Split is experiencing a profound identity crisis right now. It's a mid-range European coastal city trying to perform a delicate real-time rebrand. They want to shed the budget party crowd and attract a quieter, wealthier demographic.
What's so wild about this whole economic picture, though, is the contrast between the cost of existing in Split and the cost of getting there.
Oh, the flight data.
Yeah. We pulled some 2026 kayak flight data for the report, and it shows that getting to Split has actually never been cheaper. We are talking about a major drop in average flight prices compared to just a year ago.
It's kind of counterintuitive.
It really is. You can get a round trip from the United States starting at $511 in the shoulder season. From the UK, budget carriers like Ryanair and EasyJet are running return routes for anywhere from 89 to 150 pounds.
It creates a fascinating paradox.
Mm-hmm.
The barrier to entry has plummeted, but the cost of survival once you land has skyrocketed. The arithmetic of 2026 is simple. The airplane seat is cheap. The ground you walk on is incredibly expensive.
Which makes finding value on the ground absolutely critical.
Right.
And that leads us to a big part of Module 1, which is what we call the ferry hack. We positioned it as the ultimate saving grace for the budget-conscious traveler heading to the islands.
Yes, the ferry hack is essential.
But I want to unpack this a bit, because when we were running the numbers, I was initially a bit skeptical. So the hack is to ignore the private tourist catamarans and make the state-owned Jadrolinija public car ferry instead.
Right.
The public ferry costs 6.50 euros and takes 2 hours to get to a town called Stari, Grad, on the island of Hvar. The tourist catamaran, on the other hand, costs 24 euros, but it gets you straight to the famous Hvar town in just 55 minutes.
So you're looking at a difference of 17.50 euros, but you're doubling your transit time.
Yeah, and that was my exact issue when we first looked at it. When you're on vacation, time is literally your most precious asset. You only have so many days. Is saving 17.50 really worth losing an hour in transit each way? Over a round trip, that's 2 hours of your vacation spent sitting on a slow boat just to keep a few euros in your pocket.
On a pure spreadsheet level, your pushback makes complete sense. But our argument goes much deeper than the 17.50 euros. It's actually quite persuasive once you look at the geography.
Let's break that down.
It's not just about the cost of the ticket, it's about the reality of where that ferry deposits you.
How?
Well, the expensive fast catamaran drops you directly in a Hvar town. Now, Hvar town is globally famous, which means it is notoriously over-touristed. It's wildly expensive, and in the peak summer season, it is visually and audibly exhausting.
It's a madhouse.
It really is. It's an epicenter of the exact party tourism Split is trying to escape.
Right.
But the Jadrolinija public ferry, however, drops you on the northern side of the island in Stari Grad.
Ah, Stari Grad.
Yeah. Stari Grad is a UNESCO-protected, genuine medieval town. It operates at local prices, the pace is radically slower, and the architecture is remarkably intact.
So the real value proposition isn't the boat ride itself.
Precisely. The hack isn't just, take a slower boat to save pocket change. The hack is to use the slower, cheaper infrastructure to arrive at a vastly superior, more authentic destination.
You're bypassing the tourist trap entirely.
Exactly. You save money on the transit, and then you save vastly more money on food and accommodation once you arrive, all while having a significantly better experience.
Okay, when you frame it like that, it makes perfect sense. You're trading a fast, expensive ride to a chaotic bottleneck for a scenic ride to a hidden gem.
Exactly.
And speaking of avoiding bottlenecks, let's move to Module 2, the calendar reality check. Our research makes it incredibly clear that timing your visit is no longer just a matter of checking the weather app to see if you need a light jacket.
Definitely not.
Choosing your month is the single biggest financial and psychological decision you will make regarding this trip.
Without question. In the report, we highlight what we term the paradox of Split.
Right.
We have to hold two realities in our minds simultaneously. Split is a massive summer resort destination, but it is also a permanent functioning city of 180,000 people.
It's a real city.
And the absolute heart of this city, the place everyone wants to be, is Diocletian's palace, a structure built by a Roman emperor in 305 AD.
A 1,700-year-old retirement home that is now expected to handle a 21st century global tourism apparatus.
Which is an impossible architectural mandate. It just can't do it. And that brings us to our month-by-month breakdown. Let's look at November through March, the true off-season.
The financial swing here is staggering.
It really is. A standard 3-star hotel that commands 167 euros a night in the heat of July plummets to between 54 and 80 euros in November.
That's a 60% drop. But what is the experience actually like then? Are things even open?
Well, the temperature hovers around 12 to 16 degrees Celsius, so you certainly aren't swimming. You might encounter some rain. But the trade-off is profound. The palace is empty of tourists.
Wow.
It reverts to being a local neighborhood. You can walk through the peristyle square and hear your own footsteps echoing off the stone, rather than the clamor of 1,000 tour groups.
I love the idea of that. So peaceful. But if you want a bit more warmth, we labeled April and May as the sweet spot.
Yes, it's a sweet spot.
Temperatures rise to a very pleasant 18 to 24 degrees Celsius.
It's the transitional awakening of the city. The seasonal catamaran ferries start running their expanded routes on April 1st. Flight prices, particularly from North America, hit their annual low in April.
And there's a beautiful natural trigger we found, too.
Oh, the lavender.
Yeah. If you time your trip for late May, the famous lavender fields on the island of Hvar begin to bloom. The air literally smells different. It offers this perfect, fleeting equilibrium between manageable crowds, fully open amenities, and reasonable costs.
But then, inevitably, we crash into the peak warning, July and August. And we did not mince words in the dossier here.
No, we didn't.
Split receives an unbelievable 900,000 visitors, and the vast bulk of them arrive within this tiny 8-week window.
It creates a severe temporal bottleneck. Modern tourism is so rigidly dictated by school holidays and corporate vacation schedules that it forces a massive volume of humanity into a very narrow corridor of time and space.
It does. We described Diocletian's palace in August not as a historical site, but as a functional queue.
A functional queue. That is perfectly said.
You aren't exploring. You are just standing in line behind someone else who is standing in line. And prices reflect this insanity. A decent 4-star hotel will run you 197 to 230 euros a night.
And the beaches.
The famous Bačvice beach, which is right in the city, is wall-to-wall human bodies by 10 a.m. The physical infrastructure of a 4th-century palace simply cannot expand to accommodate 900,000 people. The lanes are narrow, the walls are stone, the heat gets trapped.
It makes me think of an analogy. Visiting Split in August sounds exactly like trying to appreciate the intricate, delicate brushstrokes of a priceless Renaissance painting, but you're being forced to do it while squashed in the middle of a heavy metal mosh pit.
That is a highly accurate, if slightly claustrophobic comparison.
You know the beauty is there right in front of you, but the physical environment makes it impossible to actually engage with it.
Exactly. You are paying a premium, that 60% markup from November, just to stand shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other overheated, frustrated people.
So if you are listening to this and planning a trip, you really have to ask yourself a hard question. Are you willing to trade a swim in the warm Adriatic Sea in August for the chance to have a Roman palace entirely to yourself in November? Because that's the genuine trade-off.
And that introduces a very interesting wild card. September 2026. We flagged this specific month as a massive transition period to watch.
Because of the alcohol ban?
Precisely. September has historically been an excellent shoulder month. Crowds begin to thin out as schools resume, but the Adriatic Sea is at its absolute warmest, and the air temperature averages a gorgeous 26 degrees Celsius.
Sounds ideal.
It is. But in 2026, September is when the 8p-meter retail alcohol ban legally takes effect.
So you have this residual warmth of the summer, but with a city that is being forcibly, legislatively calmed down by civic policy,
Right.
it's going to be an incredible social experiment. Will the budget party crowds cancel their September trips entirely? Will the cultural tourists rush in to fill the void?
It creates an unpredictable dynamic, but potentially a highly rewarding one for the traveler who values atmosphere over nightlife.
Okay, let's shift gears to Module 3. You've weighed the calendar, you've picked your month, you've booked your flight, and your plane finally touches down at SBU, Split Airport. Let's talk about arrival logistics. We made a fascinating argument that your first 24 hours on the ground dictate the entire psychological tone of your trip.
The context of the airport itself is important to note here. It's located about 25 kilometers northwest of the city center, in an area called Jadrolinija.
Right.
It was designed as a relatively modest regional airport, but it suddenly finds itself handling upwards of 4,000 passengers a day in the peak of July. It is highly functional, but it is not glamorous. It is a conduit.
A busy one.
Very busy. And the very first decision you make when the automatic sliding doors open to the Croatian air is crucial to your budget.
We break down the transport options in the dossier, and it's basically a minefield.
Total minefield.
You have the radio taxis lining up outside. They know you are tired, and they will run you 25 to 35 euros for the trip into town. Then you have the dedicated airport shuttles, which are better at 7 to 9 euros, but they only drop you at the main bus station.
Right, they don't navigate to your hotel.
Exactly. You have the car hire desks right in the terminal, charging 49 to 90 euros a day. And then, tucked away from the aggressive marketing, there is the Promet Split bus line 37.
The local transit option.
Yes. It costs exactly 3.47 euros. It takes 45 minutes, which is barely longer than a taxi in heavy traffic, and it runs frequently. We singled this out as one of the most important pieces of logistical advice in the entire report.
It really is.
And what I find so compelling about this is human behavior. Thousands of people walk out of that airport in July, look right past a perfectly functioning €3 public bus, and willingly pay 35 euros for a taxi simply because they are intimidated by the idea of navigating local transit in a foreign country.
The intimidation factor is real, but we highlight an even bigger psychological pitfall at the airport, the car rental trap.
Oh, this one is terrible.
We see this cognitive bias in travel behavior constantly. People land in a foreign country, and their instinct is to rent a car-paying top dollar up to 90 euros a day because they equate a rental vehicle with freedom, independence, and exploration.
Which is totally understandable if you're driving Route 66 across America.
Sure, but disastrous if your destination is Split.
Why is that?
Because the historic center of Split, including the entire Old Town and Diocletian's Palace, is heavily pedestrianized. You physically cannot drive a car into the areas where you will likely be sleeping and eating.
It's all walking paths.
Exactly. Parking on the periphery is scarce and expensive. So you pay a massive premium at the airport for this illusion of freedom, only to realize you have saddled yourself with a logistical nightmare.
You're just carrying around this burden.
You end up hunting for a parking spot miles from your accommodation, and then you're dragging your luggage to the heat anyway.
It's basically paying a daily fee to own a massive, stressful piece of metal you can't use. The message is clear. Skip the car, take line 37. But let's move past the transit. We painted a wonderfully vivid picture of what it actually feels like to arrive in the city.
I love this part.
You get off the bus near the ferry port. The very first sensory experience you have is this complex mix. The heavy smell of diesel fuel from the massive working vessels, the sharp scent of salt water, and the distinct smell of fresh fish from the nearby markets. You walk for 5 minutes with your bags, and suddenly the Riva Promenade opens up in front of you.
The Riva is iconic. It is a 500-meter-long, palm-lined waterfront avenue. The sea is on your left, the towering stone walls of the Roman palace are on your right, and there is a constant undulating current of humanity flowing between them. It functions quite literally as the city's living room.
It sounds incredibly cinematic, but we note that within those first 24 hours of walking the Riva and exploring the palace, a profound psychological arc occurs for most travelers.
It really hits you.
You arrive with the mindset that Split is your grand destination, but the palace, as dense and magnificent as it is, delivers its primary historical impact quite quickly. You can walk through the Golden Gate, stand in the Peristyle Square, and explore the subterranean vaults in about 2 hours.
And then the realization hits.
Yeah.
You stand on the Riva, you look out at the massive harbor, you see the digital ferry departure boards flashing destinations like Brač, Hvar, Vis, and Korčula, and you understand the true nature of the city.
That Split isn't the final destination.
Right. Split is the launchpad.
It's the hub, not the spokes. That is a massive paradigm shift. If you try to treat Split like a week-long resort, you will be disappointed and overcharged. If you treat it as a dynamic working hub to access the Adriatic, it unlocks its true value.
And realizing that changes how you should approach your entire stay, particularly where you choose to sleep.
Which brings us precisely to Module 4, Accommodation Economics. Where you drop your bags dictates both the health of your budget and your literal sanity. We divide the city very cleanly into 3 distinct accommodation zones. Let's start with Zone 1, inside Diocletian's Palace.
On paper, Zone 1 is the postcard dream. You are booking a room inside a 4th century Roman structure. It sounds impossibly romantic, but the reality is incredibly stark.
It really is.
Financially, it's going to run you 120 to 200 euros a night for a standard double room in peak season. Logistically, because no vehicles are allowed, you are dragging your suitcase likely on a hand trolley if the hotel provides one over ancient, deeply grooved cobblestones for blocks.
And then there's the acoustic reality.
Yes, we were unforgiving here. It is what we term the harsh reality of heritage hospitality.
I love that phrase.
Roman architecture was engineered for 2 things: military defense and imperial grandeur. It was built with massive blocks of solid limestone and marble. It was absolutely not designed for acoustic dampening.
So every single sound bounces.
Endlessly. The stone acts as an amplifier. If you book a room in the palace during the summer, you are exposed to maximum noise until 2 a.m. Every footstep, every rolling suitcase, every late-night reveler echoes straight up into your window.
We put a great line in the report about this. Staying inside the palace is magical for exactly one night, but if you try to use it as a 5-night base, it becomes deeply wearing on the nervous system.
It exhausts you.
Which brings us to our preferred location, Zone 2, the Old Town periphery. We are talking about neighborhoods immediately adjacent to the palace, like Varoš and Manusha.
Zone 2 is where the value matrix really lines. You're looking at 60 to 90 euros a night in the shoulder season, and maybe 110 to 150 in the peak.
Which is much better.
Much better. And you still get the incredible atmosphere. Narrow alleys, old stone houses, fig trees hanging over walls. But crucially, you are embedded in a neighborhood that still has local life. You find authentic family-run taverns, known as canobas, right on your street.
And you are only a 10-minute walk from the chaos of the palace, meaning you can visit the history without having to try and sleep inside it.
Exactly. It's the buffer zone.
And if you need even more of a buffer, there is Zone 3, which encompasses neighborhoods further east from the center, like Spinat, Ferrol, and Bačvice. This is much more residential, significantly cheaper, and closer to the actual beaches. We highly recommend Zone 3 for families who need a bit of breathing room and don't want to navigate strollers through crowds every single time they leave the apartment.
The physical layout of a city dictates your daily friction. Zone 3 lowers that friction for families.
Let's drill down into the accommodation tiers across these zones because we put a very specific piece of advice in the dossier regarding the high end of the market. We listed the backpacker options hostels like Gravitas running 24 euros for a dorm. We have the mid-range places like Oleander Apartments for 82 euros. But then we analyzed the luxury tier. You have 4- and 5-star hotels in Split like the Radisson Blue charging 185 to 250 euros or Le Méridien Lav commanding 200 to 280 euros a night.
Yet, we make a compelling case that the true luxury play isn't in Split at all.
Exactly. We point out that the premium top-tier luxury experience exists out on the islands. We cite places like the Amfora Grand Beach Resort on Hvar, which runs 250 to 400 euros a night.
Right.
So if you are a traveler with a healthy budget, and the luxury experience in Split is fundamentally inferior to the luxury experience a short ferry ride away, why would you ever book luxury in Split?
You wouldn't. And that is a strategic error many high-end travelers make. They pick a dot on a map and try to force that destination to provide an experience it isn't designed for.
It's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly. Split is a working port city with a gorgeous historic core. It does not have the sweeping, secluded, private beach resort geography of the islands.
Yeah.
Our advice in the dossier is incredibly shrewd here. Align your capital with the destination's actual strengths. Meaning, use a cheaper, highly efficient mid-range base in Split, maybe an apartment in Varoš, to explore the heritage and utilize the transit hub. Then, save your budget. Take the ferry to Hvar and spend that accumulated capital to splurge on genuine, uncompromised island luxury.
Don't buy a Ferrari to drive in gridlock. Use Split for the logistics. Use the islands for the indulgence.
Precisely.
All right, moving on to the next major phase of the trip. Module 5, food. You've dropped your bags in Varoš, you're hungry, and you step out onto the street. But depending on which direction you walk, you are entering one of two entirely different economic realities.
The post-Euro inflation hasn't impacted everything equally. It has violently ripped the local food economy and the tourist food economy far apart. They exist side by side geographically, but miles apart financially.
The local system is built around those Varoš Tanobas we mentioned, the Daily Pazar Green Market, and the Rybarnica Fish Market. It operates on the economics of a working Eastern European city. The tourist system, on the other hand, is centered squarely on the Riva waterfront and the interior squares of the palace. This system is defined by laminated menus with large photos of the food, multilingual hosts standing outside, and prices that have surged 25 to 35% just since 2023.
The dichotomy is even visible at the grocery store level.
Yes. Let's talk about the grocery reality, because this is where the margins are made or lost for budget travelers. You have Konsum, which is a ubiquitous local chain. The prices there reflect local wages. A half-liter of bottled water is about 30 cents, a freshly baked loaf of local pogača bread is 90 cents, and beautiful fresh tomatoes are under 2 euros a kilo.
Which is super affordable.
It is. You can buy incredible local cured ham, prout, at the deli counter for 3 or 4 euros per 100 grams. Then you have Spar, which is visibly pricier but stocks recognizable international brands for expats. And finally, you have Lidl, the German discount giant. Lidl is 20 to 25% cheaper than Konsum across the board, but the catch is that they're located on the outskirts of the city, requiring a taxi or a long bus ride to access.
So even buying an apple requires a calculation of time versus money. But the real financial shock, the place where tourists hemorrhage their daily budget, comes when you sit down at a restaurant.
The price comparisons we found are brutal. If you walk into a Canoba in Varoš, a beautiful plate of freshly grilled local fish will cost you 14 to 20 euros, and often the house will throw in a small glass of wine or a digestifery.
Yeah, that hospitality is still there.
But that exact same dish, quite literally the same species of fish pulled from the same sea, served on the Riva waterfront, will cost you 28 to 42 euros.
It's unbelievable.
A standard cappuccino in a local Varoš cafe is around 2 euros. On the Riva, looking at the boats, you're paying 4.50.
You are paying 100% markup purely to rent the view.
And we called out a specific localized version of this that I find fascinating. We called it the peristyle surcharge.
Yes.
The peristyle is the stunning central square inside the palace. There are a couple of restaurants that have tables directly facing the ancient columns. They charge 32 to 45 euros for a main course. We noted that if you walk exactly 7 minutes outside the palace walls to a place called Canoba Matoni, you get a culinarily superior version of that exact same dish for 14 to 18 euros.
We described the peristyle pricing perfectly. It is a tax on geographical laziness.
A tax on geographical laziness. I love that. The restaurants know that after a day of sightseeing, many tourists simply lack the energy to walk 7 minutes, and they price their menus accordingly.
They absolutely do.
And we see this disconnect between the local rhythm and the tourist rhythm play out beautifully at the fish market, the Rabarnica. We note that the market opens at 6 a.m. The serious local chefs and grandmothers are there at 7 a.m. to get the best catch.
It is a flurry of legitimate economic activity.
But here's the detail I love. We point out that tourists operating on vacation time inevitably wander into the fish market around 11 a.m. And what do they find? Empty tables covered in melting ice.
It is the perfect metaphor for the modern travel experience.
It really is. If you treat a working city purely like a resort, sleeping in, strolling out at midday, expecting to be entertained, the real, authentic city has already conducted its business, packed up, and vanished. All you are left with is the empty stage set and the puddles of ice.
To see the real city, you have to adopt the city's schedule.
Yeah.
And while we are touching on local culture, we included a few vital etiquette notes in the dossier.
Yeah, let's run through those quickly.
First, tipping. It isn't strictly mandated by Croatian law, but the reality on the ground in 2026 is that a 10% tip is standard practice in restaurants. Leaving nothing is considered poor form.
And there's a crucial note about visiting the Cathedral of St. Domnius, which sits right on the peristyle. It's an active religious site. You absolutely need covered shoulders and knees to enter. If you show up in a tank top and shorts, they won't turn you away, but they will force you to purchase and wear a rigid, incredibly unflattering cardboard-like shawl to cover up. We strongly suggest simply packing a lightweight scarf in your day bag to avoid that specific indignity.
Practical advice that saves both money and pride.
Okay, so if we take the accommodation zones, the food systems, and the transport logistics, we can finally do the math. Let's move to Module 6, the daily budget breakdown. We connected all the dots to give the out-of-pocket reality for every style of travel in 2026.
Let's begin with the backpacker demographic, because this is where the shift is most pronounced. We estimate a daily requirement of 50 to 65 euros.
Let's break down what that actually buys you.
That 65 euros assumes you are sleeping in a multi-bed dorm at a place like Gravitas. It assumes you are eating a cheap, heavy burek pastry from the bazaar market for lunch, grabbing a modest dish at a Canoba for dinner, relying exclusively on the Line 37 bus for transport, and maybe taking that cheap Jadrolinija ferry we discussed for a budget day trip to the island of Brač.
I really have to pause on this number. 50 to 65 euros a day for a backpacker. If we look at the broader landscape of global travel right now, that is simply no longer cheap.
No, it's not.
10 years ago, the whole appeal of backpacking Eastern Europe or the Balkans was that you could survive on 20 bucks a day. To hit that 65 euro mark in Split today, a budget traveler has to maintain ironclad discipline.
Absolute discipline.
You cannot slip up. If you get tired and accidentally buy a 14 euro cocktail on the Riva, or if you miss the public ferry and have to buy the 24 euro Catamaran ticket, your entire daily budget is instantly annihilated.
The margin for error is essentially zero. It requires a highly regimented form of travel.
Which is exhausting. Now let's look at the next tier, the mid-range couple. We put them at 110 to 155 euros per person per day.
This is where the city really opens up. At that price point, you are securing a private apartment in Zone 2. You are enjoying a nice sit-down Canoba dinner with wine. You have the budget to occasionally grab breakfast on the Riva just for the experience, and you can comfortably afford the ferry to Hvar and entrance fees for sites without stressing over every euro.
And then there is the luxury tier, which we peg at €250 per person per day. This gets you the 4- or 5-star hotel, the prime waterfront dinners, and perhaps a private catamaran charter for the afternoon.
Right.
But we make an important comparative point here. Even at €350 a day, split luxury is still 35 to 40% below the cost of comparable luxury experiences in places like the Amalfi coast in Italy or down the coast in Dubrovnik.
It's expensive, but it still retains comparative value within the Mediterranean luxury market. However, the most striking calculation in this module to me is the digital nomad projection.
Let's hear.
We estimate a total monthly living cost of €12,260 to €1,890 for a long-term remote worker. That figure covers a private one-bedroom apartment rental, a dedicated desk at a co-working space, groceries, eating out occasionally, and local transport.
That is an astonishingly low number for what you get.
It is incredible value. For under €2,000 a month, you are securing highly reliable European Union infrastructure, fast internet, safe streets, and a Mediterranean coastal lifestyle.
It's a steal.
It really is. If you try to replicate that exact lifestyle in coastal Spain, France, or Italy, your costs would easily double. Split represents a massive arbitrage opportunity for the remote workforce.
It's an unbeatable setup, but whether you are a digital nomad settling in for a month or a weekender passing through, there are hidden landmines waiting to destroy your spreadsheet. That brings us to Module 7, the 3 logistics traps. These can ruin your budget and your trip if you aren't paying close attention.
The first trap is one we've circled around a bit, the catamaran premium. We discussed the time versus money debate of the ferry hack, but the actual mechanism of the trap at the port is what is truly devious.
Yes, this absolutely blew my mind when we uncovered it. Describe the physical setup down at the water.
If you walk down to the Split ferry terminal, there are 2 entirely different ticketing systems operating simultaneously. You have the state-owned Jadrolinija desk, and you have the private tourist catamaran desks operated by companies like TP Line or Krilo. These physical ticket desks sit within 100 meters of each other.
They are essentially next-door neighbors.
Yes, but as we know, the catamaran to Hvar town is €24, and the Jadrolinija ferry to Stari Grad is €6.5. The trap is that neither desk acknowledges the existence of the other. There is no central board explaining your options.
So if you walk up to the catamaran desk, which is heavily branded and highly visible, and ask for a ticket to Hvar, they don't say, hey, just so you know, there's a boat 100 meters away that goes to the same island for a third of the price.
Exactly. It operates on a principle of information asymmetry. The private companies rely on the fact that most tourists do not know the public option exists.
It's basically a tax on the uninformed tourist. Let's do the math on how punishing this is. If a couple decides to do 3 separate island day trips during their stay and they blindly use the private catamarans, they will pay roughly €144 in transit. If they simply walk 100 meters to the left and purchase Jadrolinija tickets, those same 3 island trips cost them €39.
The difference is huge.
It is. That is a savings of over €100, which, as we point out, literally pays for an extra night of accommodation in a Varoš apartment.
It is an aggressive premium on convenience and ignorance.
Okay, what is trap number 2?
Trap 2 is a return to the acoustic nightmare, the palace accommodation noise trap. And the reason we classify this as a distinct trap is because of how it is marketed. The mechanism here is purely architectural deceit.
Oh.
Because the visual marketing of palace accommodation is flawless. You see these boutique hotel listings on Instagram or booking platforms. They show exposed 4th century brickwork, soft candlelight, beautiful ancient windows.
Looks gorgeous online.
It does. What the photos cannot convey is the audio reality of 400 tourists drinking heavily in the squares outside your window at 1 a.m. in mid-July.
And as we established, the stone amplifies everything.
A 1,700-year-old uninsulated limestone box acts like a megaphone. The lived reality for tourists falling into this trap is severe, multi-day sleep deprivation. We noted that if you read the TripAdvisor reviews for these high-end palace hotels during the summer, they are littered with absolute despair from exhausted people who paid top dollar to sleep in a historic echo chamber.
The fix is incredibly simple. Do not sleep inside the walls between June and September. But trap 3 is the one that has the most profound implications for the city's culture. It's the September 2026 alcohol ban. We touched on it, but let's analyze how it functions as a trap for the unsuspecting traveler.
To understand the trap, you have to understand the behavior it replaces. For decades, the standard budget traveler model in Split was simple. Go to the Konzum supermarket, buy a bottle of local Plavac Mali red wine.
Wait, pause on that. Plavac Mali, what kind of wine is that? Because when I hear cheap supermarket wine, I assume it's industrial headache juice.
That's the tragic part. Plavac Mali isn't garbage. It's a genuinely robust, highly regarded, local Croatian grape, genetically related to Zinfandel. It's excellent wine. And because it's locally produced, you could buy a highly drinkable bottle in a supermarket for maybe €4 or €5.
Wow.
The ritual was to buy that bottle, take it down to the Riva, or sit on the ancient steps of the palace, drink it with friends as the sun went down, and then head to a bar later when you only needed to buy 1 or 2 expensive drinks.
It was a highly efficient, culturally ingrained social model.
But post-ban, that entire model completely collapses. Shops simply will not sell you that bottle after 8 p.m. If you want to drink in the evening, you are legislatively forced to purchase it at a licensed bar or restaurant, where a single glass of wine will cost you €5 to €8, and a cocktail will be double that.
So mathematically, this forces an extra 20 to 30 euros per night into the budget of a mid-range couple who just want a few drinks after dinner. But for a backpacker trying to survive on 60 euros a day, it completely breaks their budget. They simply cannot afford to participate in the nightlife.
Which is exactly the point. It is an active, aggressive, civic intervention. The city council isn't just trying to clean up litter. They are utilizing legislative tools to deliberately engineer social behavior and price a specific demographic right out of the city limits.
It is a fascinating, if brutal, way to gentrify a destination, pushing out the 18-year-old backpackers with a legislative hammer. But this leads perfectly into Module 8, which looks at safety, solos, and comfort. Beyond the euros and the logistics, what is the actual physical human experience of navigating this city?
Let's start with general safety. The baseline reality is that Split is a very safe European Union city. Violent crime is extremely rare. However, we point out that the risks that do exist are highly localized. It is both geographic and temporal safety.
Meaning danger only exists in specific places at specific times.
Exactly. You have predictable issues like petty theft and pickpocketing, which only occur in the dense, shoulder-to-shoulder crowds of the palace during the absolute peak of July and August. And then you have physical altercations, which almost exclusively occur around the nightlife clusters at 2A on Fridays and Saturdays. If you avoid those specific bottlenecks at those specific times, your risk profile drops to near zero.
I want to explicitly address any solo female listeners right now because we included some very specific grounded advice in the dossier. Overall, we rate Split as highly comfortable for solo women. The city center is incredibly well lit and well populated late into the evening, but we raised one major caution, and it's a fascinating sociological point.
The source of the discomfort.
Right. The primary issue for solo women isn't the local Croatian population. It is the persistent, often aggressive attention from male tourists in the nightlife zones.
It is a dark irony of the global resort ecosystem. The primary source of threat in this city is imported. It is the behavior of other visitors who feel completely untethered from their normal social constraints and consequences because they are on vacation.
The advice in the report is highly practical. Walk confidently through those specific nightlife zones rather than lingering in them. Because outside of that 2-block radius, walking the Riva at 9 p.m., exploring the Varoš neighborhood, or taking the ferries is relaxed and completely uneventful.
We also dedicated a section to families, and the advice follows the same temporal logic. Timing is everything.
Yes, outside of peak season, Split is fantastic for kids. Bačvice Beach has this shallow, sandy water that stays knee-deep for ages, which is perfect for kids under 10. The subterranean vaults underneath the palace, which are basically the ancient basements, are cool, slightly spooky, and totally fascinating for older kids. And the report mentions booking a boat trip to the Yacht Islands for 30 to 45 euros to spot sea turtles.
Wait, hold on. I have to stop you there.
What? What is it?
This is an incredible detail. The Yacht Islands are not in Croatia.
Wait, really?
The Yacht Islands are a protected nature reserve in the Gulf of Oman, off the coast of the Middle East. We've clearly suffered a copy-paste error from another one of our travel dossiers.
Oh, wow. That is hilarious. So if you are in Split, do not try to book a day trip to Oman.
Precisely. However, if we correct our own geographical typo, the underlying advice remains solid. You can easily book local island hopping excursions from Split to places like the Peklani Islands or the Blue Lagoon. The key for families is simply to ensure you are booking a family-paced nature excursion and not accidentally booking yourself onto a Catamaran booze cruise.
Good save. And what is the golden rule for families?
Never Under any circumstances, attempt to bring a pushchair or stroller into the palace lanes in July. The combination of dense crowds, intense heat, and deeply rutted cobblestones turns it into a physical nightmare.
And on the health front, just to cover all bases, the KBC Split Hospital is rated as highly solid. We note that EIC and GHIC cards are valid here.
Yes. For context, the EHE is the European Health Insurance Card, which gives EU citizens access to state-provided health care during a temporary stay. The GHIC is the Global Health Insurance Card, the post-Brexit equivalent for UK citizens. If you hold either of those, you are covered for emergency care. If you are listening from North America or Australia, it just means you need to ensure you have standard, robust travel medical insurance because you are entirely out of network.
Perfect. So we've navigated the crowds, we've avoided the Omani Islands, and we've survived the noise traps. That brings us to Module 9, the emotional core of the trip. When the vacation is over and the budget is spent, what are the memories that will actually stay with you? We break this down into best moments and honest disappointments.
Let's start with what we call the sublime. These are the moments that justify the entire journey.
The description we provide of the peristyle at dawn is genuinely moving. Standing in the main square of the palace at 6:30 in the morning, the city is still entirely asleep. The early morning light is golden and hitting the 1,700-year-old original stone columns. The only sound is a municipal worker quietly hosing down the ancient stones. There are no crowds, no tour guides waving umbrellas. It is just you and antiquity.
It highlights a tragic flaw in how most people travel. Thousands of tourists chase the exact same brochure photo in the middle of the day, actively elbowing each other out of the way to get a shot of the square. In doing so, they completely miss the actual breathless magic of the architecture, which only reveals itself at dawn when the city breathes.
The authentic moments require effort. We also highlight the sensory chaos of the Tuesday morning Pazar market, the incredible affordable food at Konoba Matoni, that secret €15 local boat crossing from Milna to Hvar, and the experience of hiking Marjan Hill. Marjan Hill offers these sweeping panoramic views of the islands. It costs absolutely nothing, and it is somehow almost entirely ignored by the tourist masses down below.
But then we pivot to the overhyped experiences. The things that look incredible on Instagram but fail in reality.
Zlatni Rat Beach on the island of Brač is our prime example. If you've looked up Croatia online, you've seen the aerial drone shot of this beach. It's a remarkably shaped golden pebble peninsula jutting out into impossibly blue water. It looks like paradise.
From a drone, yes. But the physical reality of standing on that beach in August is very different. It is a sea of roasting flesh. It is wall-to-wall bodies, aggressive towel placement, and expensive parasol rentals. The image you consumed online and the lived reality of the space are entirely divorced from one another.
We say the same thing about the famous Hvar town sunset. Technically, yes, the sun setting over the Adriatic is beautiful, but the reality is that you are standing in a sweaty queue, waiting to pay €14 for a mediocre cocktail, while 500 other people try to take the exact same photograph.
It's exhausting.
Meanwhile, if you took the ferry hack to Stari Grad, you could sit by the water and watch the exact same sun go down in total peace for the price of a €4 beer.
But the true disappointment, the element that really provoked a philosophical reaction of the dossier, is the commercialization of the palace interior itself.
Yeah, this part hit hard. We note that just a decade ago, those ancient Roman lanes inside the walls were still filled with a functional local economy. There were ironmongers, local tailors, traditional shoemakers. It was a living neighborhood inside a monument.
But now,
Today, those local tradespeople have been almost entirely evicted by exorbitant commercial rents. They have been replaced by the exact same homogenized Mediterranean tourist retail that you find in every other port city.
generic gelato stands, shops selling mass-produced snow globes, stores selling lavender pouches that were probably imported. It prompts a fascinating philosophical dilemma, which we essentially frame as the ship of Theseus paradox applied to urban tourism.
For anyone who hasn't taken Philosophy 101 recently, remind us how that works.
The ship of Theseus is an ancient thought experiment. Imagine a famous wooden ship. Over the years, a plank of wood rots, so the sailors replace it with a new plank. A few years later, a mast snaps, so they replace the mast. Eventually, over centuries, every single original piece of wood has been replaced. The question is it still the same ship?
Right. And applying that to Split is profound. In this case, the physical Roman stones are original, But the people, the grandmothers living in the apartments, the tailors, the bakers, they are the wooden planks. If every single local person is evicted and replaced by a souvenir shop or a boutique hotel, is it still actually Split? Or is it just a museum wearing the clothes of a dead city?
Exactly. When the local soul is priced out, you are left with a beautifully preserved corpse. We argue that there are still pockets of genuine living hospitality just outside the walls in places like Varoš, but inside the palace, the paradox is nearly complete.
Which naturally leads us to a massive logistical question in Module 10, the alternatives. If the commercialization of Split turns you off, if the paradox bothers you, should you jump ship and go somewhere else entirely? We address this by comparing Split to two major alternatives, Dubrovnik, Croatia, and Kotor, Montenegro.
Dubrovnik is the obvious immediate comparison. It has the dramatic medieval walls, the massive global fame accelerated by Game of Thrones, the pristine ocean views. But we cut through the fantasy very quickly with the financial reality. Dubrovnik in 2026 is, across the board, 40 to 60% more expensive than Split.
That is a staggering premium.
And it is a fully commodified environment. The gentrification is complete. They've had to cap cruise ship visitors at 4,000 per day just to keep the streets physically passable. They charge tourists 35 euros simply for the privilege of walking along the top of the city walls. It's a premium, high-friction heritage museum.
And then there is Kotor, down the coast in Montenegro. We note that Kotor is 35 to 40% cheaper than Split. It features absolutely stunning Venetian architecture tucked into a dramatic fjord, surrounded by massive, imposing mountains. It sounds perfect.
It is beautiful, but it completely lacks the dynamic infrastructure of Split. Because it is tucked into a fjord, it doesn't have that incredible, sprawling island ferry network. You are somewhat geographically locked in.
So if we look at the three options, our conclusion is that Dubrovnik is the pristine, expensive museum. Kotor is the breathtaking, isolated landscape. But Split, despite its flaws, despite the commercialization of the palace and the tourist traps, remains the Goldilocks city. It offers the absolute best balance of heritage, genuine urban life, and unmatched access to the islands.
Which brings us to Module 11, the final summation of the entire report. We synthesize all of this data, the prices, the traps, the geography, to answer the ultimate question for every major demographic: is Split worth it in 2026?
Let's run through our final verdicts. First, the backpacker. Our dossier says, yes, with conditions. You absolutely must avoid the peak season of July and August. You must factor the 8p-meter alcohol ban into your daily budget because the days of cheap supermarket wine on the Riva are over. And you must utilize the Jadrolinija public ferry hack to save money on island trips. If you maintain that discipline, it is still viable.
Next, the family demographic. The verdict is also yes, with conditions. The primary condition being temporal. Under no circumstances should you attempt a family vacation here in July or August. The heat and crowds are unmanageable. We recommend staying slightly outside the hypercenter in a neighborhood like Podstrana. But if you visit in June or September, it offers an excellent family experience.
For the luxury traveler, the verdict is yes with conditions. And the condition is geographic. Do not spend your entire vacation budget in Split. Use the city for 2 nights to experience the Roman heritage and the culinary scene, and then take your substantial budget over to Hvar for the true resort luxury experience.
For the digital nomad and the solo traveler, the verdict is a resounding yes. The monthly economics, under 2,000 euros for a fully integrated lifestyle, are largely unbeatable for European Union coastal living. The infrastructure is solid, and neighborhoods like Varoš offer a highly authentic community vibe once you step away from the tourist center.
But the true winner, the demographic that extracts the maximum possible value from Split in 2026, is the mid-range couple. For them, our verdict is an unequivocal YS. At a budget of 110 to 155 euros a day during the shoulder season, you are getting unparalleled Roman history, incredible local food, and dynamic island hopping for roughly 40% less than you would pay for a comparable itinerary in Italy. They represent the absolute sweet spot for the city.
Synthesizing all 11 sections of this report, the overarching takeaway is abundantly clear. Split is no longer a generic, easy destination that you can just wander into blindly and expect it to cater to your whims.
You can't just show up and wing it anymore.
Exactly. It requires highly strategic engagement. You have to know precisely when to go. You have to research which neighborhood to sleep in to avoid the noise. You need to know which specific ferry desk to walk up to. And you need the discipline to wake up at dawn to actually see the monuments. If you put in the work, the city rewards you immensely.
It demands that you be an active traveler, not a passive tourist.
As we conclude this analysis, I want to leave everyone with a broader thought regarding the trajectory of the city. We discussed the 2026 alcohol ban and the compounding inflation. We have to ask, what happens when the local Croatian residents can no longer afford to participate in the local food system in places like Varoš? As the city council aggressively rebrands Split from an accessible party hub to a highly regulated, high-yield cultural destination, will this next phase of intentional gentrification push the living city out completely? We have to wonder if, 10 years from now, that ship of Theseus paradox will be finalized, leaving Split as nothing more than a beautiful, echoing, empty museum, much like Dubrovnik.
It is a deeply sobering thought, and it's something you should absolutely mull over if you're planning to walk those ancient streets. Think about how you travel, where you spend your money, and what kind of city you are supporting. And with that, we conclude our deep dive into the complex realities of Split. To close this out exactly as we concluded our exhaustive report, that is the honest verdict from Phil and H.